The wind howls outside the cave entrance, and your small fire is fading into pale embers. When the wood runs out, you do the unthinkable. Today, you shiver when the air conditioning drops a single degree. But for over 100,000 years, your ancestors faced a completely different reality. They used methods so extreme and bizarre to fight the freezing temperatures, they border on absolute insanity. This was not just bad weather. It was the Ice Age. A brutal epoch where the cold was not just a temperature, but an invisible predator actively hunting you in the dark. Drop your modern body into a prehistoric blizzard without a winter coat or central heating, and your biological clock starts ticking down immediately. We modern humans are surprisingly fragile. Compared to ancient hunter-gatherers, our muscle mass has drastically decreased, and our bones have become significantly thinner. Anthropologists like Cohen and Armalagos documented how our robust ancient biology degraded over time. You are missing the dense, heat-generating physical armor they possessed. When the sun dips below the horizon, the temperature plummets fast. Your modern fat reserves would burn out in just a few desperate hours of shivering. You see, shivering is your brain's emergency protocol. It forces your muscles to contract violently to generate heat, burning massive amounts of precious calories. But during a prehistoric winter, calories were the rarest currency on Earth. Every piece of fruit is dead, and the herds have migrated far away. So, how did a hairless ape species from the warm savannas of Africa manage to conquer the most unforgiving frozen landscapes on the entire planet? The answer lies deep inside the darkest, most claustrophobic caves, where entire tribes huddled together, employing survival strategies that would deeply shock you today. They did not just sit around singing songs. They had to turn death itself into a source of warmth when the surrounding forest offered nothing. Imagine realizing that the only way to survive the night is to look at the leftover carcass of your dinner and see a heater. Because when the wood is too wet or buried under meters of snow, your ancestors discovered a bizarre, greasy fuel that changed everything. When firewood is buried under thick ice, you cannot afford to be picky. You have to burn exactly what you just hunted. Fresh animal bones are packed with grease and spongy marrow. Because of this high fat content, they don't just catch fire, they burn incredibly hot. Think of it as a biological candle. Your ancestors essentially used the thick fat of their prey to save their own freezing skin. This isn't just a wild theory. Anthropologists examining ancient Neanderthal hearths have found massive layers of crushed and intentionally charred animal bones. In sites across Ice Age Europe, researchers confirmed that up to 90% of the fuel in some deep cave fires was actually bone. It was a brilliant, desperate innovation for survival. But keeping your body warm this way came with a highly unpleasant and toxic cost. Sit by this prehistoric fire, and you will not smell the nostalgic, comforting scent of roasted pine cones or crackling dry cedar. Instead, your lungs will instantly choke on the thick, acrid black smoke produced by boiling animal grease and violently scorching bone marrow. It smells heavily like burnt hair and rotting meat, rapidly filling the enclosed cave interior with a suffocating, greasy, and inescapable fog. Yet, you absolutely cannot leave. Outside the entrance lies a frozen wasteland where dropping temperatures would paralyze and kill you in mere minutes. So you are forced to stay. You sit in the dark, coughing in the thick smoke, eyes watering constantly, shivering in your skins. But on the absolute worst nights of the deep Ice Age, even a roaring grease fire is not enough to keep the frostbite completely away. When the ambient temperature inside the cave hovers dangerously close to freezing, you desperately need an immediate secondary heat source to survive. That life-saving heat source is simply the physical body of the person sitting right next to you and the person sitting directly next to them. To survive the deepest freeze, your entire tribe had to engage in the most claustrophobic, suffocating sleeping arrangement in all of human history. Sleeping in a massive, tangled pile of bodies was never a choice. It was the absolute only way to share your precious core temperature. You frantically absorb the body heat of your tribe members, effectively creating a collective biological blanket against the freezing rock surrounding you. But here is the catch. You did not sleep for 8 continuous hours like you do today in your modern, comfortable, and highly secure bed. Historian Roger Kirch documented that long before artificial light, humans experienced segmented sleep. Your ancestors naturally slept in 2 completely distinct phases. You would suddenly wake up shivering in the dead of night. And in this brutal, unforgiving environment, this was actually a crucial survival mechanism. Someone constantly had to wake up to feed that greasy bone fire. If the embers died out completely, the entire group could instantly freeze. Anthropologist Polly Wiesner found that this midnight waking period was not just for pure survival. It was the exact moment when human culture was born. In the pitch black, huddled tightly together for warmth, your ancestors shared stories, myths, and absolutely crucial survival knowledge around those fading flames. Deep inside ancient caves like Chauvet or Lascaux, the flickering, greasy bonfire cast giant, dancing shadows all across the cold, oppressive stone walls. These massive shadows fed their imagination, magically turning the terrifying, endless winter night into a vivid canvas for the very first human art. Today, waking up at 3 a.m. immediately fills you with anxiety. You blindly check your glowing phone and worry about the next workday. But that midnight awakening is simply an ancient instinct. Your primitive brain is temporarily pausing sleep just to check the fire and your tribe. After tending the dying flames and sharing a few whispered words, you would finally drift back heavily into your second, much deeper sleep. You would pull the stiff, foul-smelling traditional animal hides much tighter around yourself, pressing even closer to the freezing person next to you. The deadly storm outside might rage for months, but inside this claustrophobic, smoky pile of bodies, humanity successfully survived another brutal night. But eventually, the sun rises, and you have to leave the claustrophobic warmth of the cave. The fire cannot follow you into the snow. To hunt and forage in sub-zero temperatures, you need a way to take the ambient heat of the cave out into the frozen wasteland. Your body has no thick fur, no protective blubber. You are a naked ape standing completely defenseless against the ultimate prehistoric winter storm. So, your ancestors did something brilliant, but incredibly morbid. If they could not grow their own winter coats, they would steal them from dangerous beasts. You literally had to strip the thick, bloody skin off a dead mammoth or a cave bear and drape it over your own freezing shoulders. But simply draping a raw hide is not enough. The brutal Ice Age wind would easily cut right through the gaps and freeze your core. To truly survive, humanity had to invent one of the most underrated, world-changing technologies in history. It was not the wheel or the hand axe. It was the needle. Specifically, tiny, delicate needles meticulously carved from animal bones, found in prehistoric sites like Denisova Cave, Cien Verify Mock. These simple bone needles allowed your ancestors to pierce tough leather and tightly stitched tailored garments, completely sealing their body heat inside the fur. But how do archaeologists actually know exactly when you started wearing clothes, since ancient leather rots away and completely disappears from the fossil record? The evidence is actually crawling right now on the human body. Scientists looked at the evolutionary DNA timeline of the common human body louse. Head lice lived on our hair, but body lice specifically evolved to live and lay eggs inside human clothing, thriving in the warm fabric. Genetic studies reveal these clothing lice split from head lice roughly 170,000 years ago, perfectly matching the deep glacial period. This means the simple act of sewing together dead animal skins is what gave you the ultimate superpower to conquer the freezing global climate. By stealing the biological armor of other species, you transformed from a vulnerable tropical ape into an apex survivor of the extreme ice age. But even the thickest animal hide is just an insulator. It traps heat, but it cannot create it. Your body is the only furnace. And to keep that internal biological furnace burning in sub-zero temperatures, you need a massive, constant intake of high-density calories. Finding food during an ice age winter is a brutal game of mathematics. Every step through the deep snow burns precious energy you cannot replace. You might try to hunt, but taking down massive, dangerous prehistoric megafauna in a blizzard is incredibly risky and exhausting. Sight, 1. Persistence hunting, where early humans chased prey until it collapsed, simply does not work when you are freezing and wading through deep snow. Site 1. So, your ancestors often had to rely on a much darker survival strategy. You became a scavenger, searching for the frozen leftovers of other predators. Archaeological evidence shows early humans frequently smashed open the abandoned, frozen bones of scavenged animals to extract whatever nutrients remained inside. They were after the bone marrow. This dense, spongy tissue is packed with pure fat and essential calories needed to keep your heart beating. You would sit in the biting wind, cracking open a freezing femur with a heavy stone, desperately sucking out the cold, raw fat. Anthropologists studying modern foragers, like James Sussman, note that sharing these incredibly rare, high-fat resources was absolutely mandatory for the tribe's survival. Site 1. If you found a frozen carcass, you brought the marrow back to the cave. You shared it equally, because tomorrow, someone else might save you. In the prehistoric world, selfishness was a death sentence. Egalitarian sharing ensured that the entire group could maintain their internal temperatures through the night. Site 1. As you digest that dense animal fat, your internal furnace reignites. Your blood warms up, and the shivering finally begins to subside. The combination of stolen animal skins on the outside and scavenged animal fat on the inside created an impenetrable biological shield against the ice. You have survived another day. But the Ice Age was not just a test of finding food. It also forced your body to adapt permanently. While your direct ancestors were figuring out how to steal animal skins, another group of humans had already mastered the prehistoric winter. Meet the Neanderthals. They did not just barely survive the Ice Age tundra. Their entire biology was fundamentally engineered to dominate it. Biologists refer to this adaptation as Bergmann's and Allen's rules. In brutally cold climates, warm-blooded animals naturally evolved to be significantly stockier with much shorter limbs. By drastically reducing the surface area of their skin, Neanderthals minimized the exact amount of precious body heat lost to the freezing air. Compared to a tall, slender modern human, a Neanderthal was a compact, heavily muscled biological furnace perfectly designed for maximum heat retention. Look closely at their unique facial structure. They possessed massive, wide nasal cavities that might look quite strange to our modern aesthetic standards today. But that huge nose was actually a built-in radiator. It actively warmed and humidified the freezing, dry air before it could damage their lungs. This incredible physical armor allowed them to hunt massive Ice Age beasts directly in the snow, without relying solely on thick clothing. Researchers from modern science institutes have confirmed that their wide, bell-shaped rib cages housed massive lungs and a highly powerful heart. However, this ultimate winter body came with a terrifying price tag. Maintaining that level of muscle and internal heat required an unbelievable fuel source. To keep their biological engines running, a prehistoric hunter likely needed an astonishing 5,000 to 7,000 calories every single day. CN verify. To get those calories, they had to engage in violent, close-quarters combat with megafauna, using heavy thrusting spears instead of throwing them. Because of this extremely dangerous hunting style, archaeological sites reveal that nearly all adult prehistoric skeletons carry signs of severe, bone-crushing physical trauma. But here is the most beautiful part. Fossils from deep caves show these severely injured individuals were carefully nursed back to health. Their stocky bodies fought the brutal ice, but it was their deep, solemn compassion for each other that truly kept them alive in the dark. The physical cold was a monster, yes, but the absolute most terrifying nightmare for your ancestors was the psychological terror of total isolation. If you were separated from the glowing, life-saving body heat of your tribe, the Ice Age would consume you in minutes. Getting accidentally lost in a prehistoric blizzard was a tragic death sentence. But there was something far worse: intentional exile. Imagine being kicked out of the cave. The tribe decides you are no longer worthy of sharing their precious caloric warmth. In the brutal prehistoric economy, exile meant your biological furnace would simply shut down forever in the dark snow. This is exactly what evolutionary researcher Robin Dunbar means when he discusses the concept of the social brain site. 1. He theorized that your massive brain did not just evolve to make tools, it evolved specifically to maintain complex relationships so you wouldn't freeze. This survival instinct is so deeply hardwired that modern neuroscience shows social rejection activates the exact same brain regions as physical pain. Today, when you get rejected by a friend, dumped by a partner, or fired from your job, you feel a deep, aching chest pain. Your modern brain does not just feel sad. It feels sheer, unadulterated evolutionary panic, triggering an ancient, deep-seated survival alarm. Because to your primitive DNA, being socially rejected in a modern office feels exactly like being pushed out of the warm cave. Your body physically reacts as if the freezing blizzard is about to instantly rip through your skin and stop your heart. This is why, when you feel deeply sad or lonely today, you instinctively curl up and pull a heavy blanket over yourself. It is a classic evolutionary mismatch. You are perfectly safe in a heated apartment, but your genetics are screaming for the tribe's body heat. Even surrounded by solid concrete walls, your subconscious is still sitting in that dark cave, desperately hoping the fire does not go out. When you turn off the lights in your modern home, a faint, inexplicable unease often creeps into the back of your mind. We call it nyctophobia, brushing it off as a childish fear of the dark. But it is actually a highly tuned evolutionary alarm system. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans were not the apex predators of the night. We were merely soft, slow-moving targets wrapped in stolen fur. Just beyond the flickering edge of your greasy bonfire, massive prehistoric nightmares like the cave lion and the saber-toothed cat were actively hunting. They possessed thick fur to withstand the blizzard and advanced night vision to easily track your tribe's movements through the pitch-black tundra. This terrifying reality is exactly why your ancient ancestors relied so heavily on the segmented, two-phase sleep model every single night. The tribe could never afford to fall completely unconscious at the exact same time. Someone always had to remain awake to maintain the perimeter. During that midnight waking period, you were not just sharing stories, you were actively standing guard, keeping the fragile flames alive. If you fell asleep and the fire died, the freezing temperatures would weaken you, and the waiting predators would finish the job. Fire was no longer just a clever tool for cooking or melting ice. It became an absolute physical boundary between life and a violent death. The campfire was your tribe's ultimate protector. As long as it burned brightly, the monsters of the Ice Age kept their safe distance. It is no coincidence that anthropologists believe this exact dynamic gave birth to the earliest forms of human reverence and profound spiritual connection. You did not just use the fire, you depended on it entirely. You practically worshipped the heat that kept your fragile biology functioning. Today, when you sit around a crackling campfire, you instantly feel a profound, inexplicable sense of peace, safety, and deep social bonding. That feeling is not just nostalgia. It is your ancient DNA exhaling a sigh of relief because the predator-repelling warmth is still there. But the psychological terror of the night was only half the battle. Surviving the Ice Age meant enduring unimaginable physical confinement. Imagine being completely trapped inside a small, dark, damp stone box with 20 other people for 6 continuous, brutally freezing months. You cannot simply walk outside to get fresh air or stretch your legs. The blizzard outside would literally freeze you alive. This extreme confinement brings up a deeply uncomfortable question that modern schools completely ignore. How did ancient humans handle basic hygiene? When a deadly storm rages outside, you absolutely cannot leave the cave to relieve yourself. You have to do it inside. Archaeologists meticulously excavating ancient shelters have discovered distinct spatial zoning. They carefully organize the tiny space into separate sleeping, cooking, and waste areas. But clever zoning does not eliminate the harsh reality. The enclosed cave would violently reek of rotting meat, unwashed bodies, and raw human waste. You did not bathe for months. Your traditional animal hides, while incredibly warm, became a perfect breeding ground for blood-sucking parasites. In this dark, suffocating environment, you had absolutely zero physical privacy. Every single bodily function happened right next to your tribe. If you were terribly sick, you vomited next to them. If you were giving birth, the entire tribal group watched and listened very closely. Modern humans highly value personal space. But to your ancestors, isolation meant death, so constant physical proximity was deeply comforting and safe. Anthropologists note that this intense, forced closeness created an unbreakable psychological bond that modern isolated humans actually deeply crave today. To successfully tolerate the terrible smells and the extreme claustrophobia, your brain simply adapted, completely dulling your senses to the foul prehistoric stench. You shared blood-sucking parasites, you shared the thick smoke, and you shared the exact same recycled, oxygen-deprived air for the entire brutal winter. This gross, foul-smelling stone box was not a prison. It was the only reason your bloodline survived to see the next bright spring. When the first snow falls today, your modern environment is perfectly safe. Yet, your body immediately begins to execute a deeply ingrained survival program. Deep inside your DNA, a prehistoric alarm bell rings. Your primitive brain does not know that supermarkets and central heating completely exist. This is exactly why, during the colder months, you suddenly develop an intense, undeniable craving for heavy, high-fat, and sugary comfort foods. To your ancient genetics, a thick slice of modern cake or a greasy burger is the exact equivalent of life-saving Ice Age bone marrow. Evolutionary biologists call this phenomenon an evolutionary mismatch. You possess the exact same biological hardware as a prehistoric hunter, currently living in a modern office. When the temperature naturally drops, your body completely assumes a deadly famine is approaching. It desperately wants to build a thick layer of insulating fat. So, that stubborn winter weight you feel so incredibly guilty about? It is actually a highly successful evolutionary mechanism specifically designed to keep you from freezing. But your diet is not the only thing heavily influenced by the deep ice age. Your modern sleep preferences are also completely dictated by prehistoric winters. Many modern people find it nearly impossible to fall asleep in a hot room. You actively turn down the thermostat just to feel the freezing air. And then, you deliberately bury yourself under the thickest, heaviest blankets you can possibly find. Without that physical pressure, you feel inexplicably exposed and anxious. This bizarre modern sleeping habit is a direct, hardwired psychological echo of the deep past. Your brain naturally associates cold ambient air with the dark prehistoric night. And that heavy weight pressing down firmly on your chest? That physically simulates the extremely thick, heavy animal hides your ancestors stole from Ice Age beasts. But more importantly, that comforting physical pressure chemically mimics the precise feeling of being tightly surrounded by the warm, protective bodies of your ancient tribe. When you feel that specific weight, your primitive brain releases calming neurotransmitters, signaling that you are finally safe from predators and secure from the frost. You are effectively tricking your nervous system into believing that you have successfully survived the deadly blizzard, safely nestled deep within the tribal huddle. Even the way you casually relax in your living room every single evening is a direct, undeniable copy of your ancient prehistoric winter routine. For hundreds of thousands of years, your entire tribe gathered tightly around a single flickering, glowing light source immediately after the sun went down. Staring deeply into those moving flames kept you awake just long enough to process the day and maintain your vital, life-saving social bonds. Today, you naturally arrange all your expensive living room furniture to point directly at a glowing, flickering rectangular television screen in the dark. Your primitive nervous system actively processes that artificial light exactly like the protective, deeply comforting hearth of a prehistoric Ice Age cave. But there is a tragic flaw in this modern reflection. While the glowing screen perfectly mimics the fire, it completely lacks the actual tribe. You are satisfying the visual instinct of the campfire, but you are utterly starving the deep psychological need for actual physical human proximity. This specific evolutionary mismatch perfectly explains why you can feel so incredibly isolated and alone even while constantly connected to the entire internet. Your ancestors successfully endured freezing temperatures, mass starvation, and giant apex predators by sacrificing their personal privacy for absolute tribal unity. We successfully traded the claustrophobic, smelly, but highly supportive prehistoric huddle for incredibly clean, spacious, but deeply isolating modern concrete apartments. So the next time you step outside without a jacket and the freezing winter wind violently hits your face, pay very close attention. You will immediately develop tiny goosebumps all over your skin. This is another bizarre, completely useless physical reflex left over from deep prehistory. For a heavily furry animal, raising those body hairs traps a thick layer of insulating air to actively maintain their warm core temperature. But for a relatively hairless modern human, this ancient biological reflex achieves absolutely nothing to protect you against the freezing winter wind. It is just a ghostly physical echo from a brutal time before your ancestors figured out how to steal the thick skins of megafauna. But do not romanticize this deep past. Despite the greasy bone fires, the thick animal hides, and the tribal huddling, the Ice Age was a ruthless filter. The prehistoric winter aggressively culled the weak, the isolated, and those who foolishly refused to share their precious caloric resources with the group. Yet, the very fact that you are sitting here today, watching this screen, proves something absolutely incredible about your specific human bloodline. Every single person alive right now is the direct descendant of the most stubborn, resilient, and fiercely resourceful Ice Age survivors in history. What we initially view as bizarre, crazy, or disgusting survival methods were actually the absolute pinnacle of human evolutionary ingenuity at the time. Burning fresh animal bones because the frozen forest offered no wood was not madness. It was a masterclass in advanced prehistoric resource management. Inventing the tiny bone needle to perfectly stitch bloody mammoth hides together was not primitive. It was the crucial technology unlocking the earth. Waking up in the freezing darkness to feed a greasy fire was not a sleep disorder. It was the crucible where human culture emerged. And sleeping in a suffocating, smelly pile of dirty bodies was not a miserable punishment. It was the highest possible form of social trust. The freezing temperatures of the Ice Age did not hold humanity back. Paradoxically, the bitter cold is exactly what forced your ancestors to evolve. The extreme climate forced the prehistoric brain to rapidly expand, developing advanced complex problem-solving skills simply to avoid freezing to death completely overnight. It forced the sudden creation of complex language, deep empathy, and the tribal cooperation absolutely necessary to hunt massive megafauna and share vital calories. The Ice Age was not merely a long, terrible winter. It was the brutal evolutionary forge that hammered the naked ape into the modern human. Today, we have successfully conquered the cold. We have built towering concrete caves and artificial suns that keep the freezing night permanently at bay. But your primitive biology has never forgotten the deep frost. The ancient winter still lives quietly inside your bones, waiting patiently in the dark. By all mathematical logic and biological rules, the human species should have gone completely extinct during the dark peak of the Ice Age. We were clearly not physically adapted for sub-zero temperatures. We lacked the thick, natural fur and heavy protective blubber of true Arctic beasts. Yet, instead of quietly freezing to death in the endless dark, your ancestors fiercely and stubbornly rebelled against the brutal laws of nature. They cleverly hacked the harsh environment by weaponizing the greasy bones of their prey and inventing the vital, world-changing bone-sewing needle. They transformed suffocating claustrophobia and terrible smells into a powerful psychological bond of trust that quite literally saved our entire human lineage from extinction. Now, fast forward hundreds of thousands of years to your incredibly comfortable modern life. You exist today in an era of absolute thermal luxury. With the effortless push of a single digital button, you command and perfectly control the exact temperature of your immediate, enclosed living environment. You wield a level of immediate, effortless thermal control that an ancient Ice Age shaman would literally consider to be absolute divine magic. To you, winter is no longer a ruthless, terrifying monster. It is simply a pleasant excuse to drink hot chocolate and wear cozy sweaters. The terrifying, invisible ice predator that relentlessly hunted your ancestors has been completely tamed and safely locked outside your thick concrete cave. But this extreme modern luxury has unfortunately made us completely blind to the true, brutal biological cost of our very own survival. Every single time you casually complain about a slight chilly draft in your house, remember the unimaginable prehistoric grit it took to get you here. Your current, effortless convenience is built squarely and directly on top of hundreds of thousands of years of brutal, freezing, uncompromising prehistoric suffering. It was paid for by the forgotten tribes who desperately shared their core body heat in the foul-smelling, suffocating, completely claustrophobic darkness. They actively did the crazy, unthinkable, extreme things just so that one day, their distant descendants could simply turn a dial and sleep. Your ancestors paid for your modern comfort with their frozen toes, their shattered bones, and their absolute resilience in the darkness. Every single time you feel the biting cold outside, it is a direct, urgent message from the deep prehistoric past. The Ice Age physically engineered you to crave high-calorie foods, to seek heavy blankets, and to desperately need social connection. But here is the ultimate, incredibly paradoxical twist of our modern human evolution and our vast, world-changing technological progress today. We have successfully built an advanced world where the physical cold is no longer a daily, terrifying threat to our existence. We have powerful central heating, highly insulated winter jackets, and bright modern supermarkets completely overflowing with an endless, cheap supply of calories. Yet, in completely eliminating the brutal physical winter from our lives, we accidentally created a brand new, totally invisible psychological winter. During the freezing ice age, you were never truly alone. You were always surrounded by the warm bodies of your tribe. Today, you can sit alone in a perfectly heated, perfectly safe apartment and still feel completely, devastatingly freezing on the inside. Because the one crucial thing our modern world lacks is the forced, undeniable, and life-saving closeness of the ancient tribal huddle. We foolishly replace the messy, smelly, but deeply supportive group survival sleep with isolated, highly sterile, and painfully empty modern rooms. Your primitive biology is still quietly sitting by the ancient fire, desperately waiting for the rest of the tribe to return. Anthropologists argue this exact evolutionary mismatch is the hidden root cause of so much modern anxiety and deep-seated human depression. You are essentially an elite Ice Age survivor, completely stripped of the very community that made your incredible survival possible. So the very next time you purposefully turn down the thermostat and pull that heavy blanket tightly over your chest. Every single inch of your modern biology is basically a living, breathing museum dedicated entirely to Ice Age survival and profound human resilience. We walk through perfectly heated buildings and perfectly insulated homes, completely forgetting the brutal evolutionary forge that fiercely shaped us. But deep inside your bones, the ancient hardware is still running perfectly, constantly scanning the modern horizon for a sudden deadly frost. When anthropologists carefully examine shattered, freezing prehistoric fossils today, we should not just see primitive, desperate ape-like creatures struggling in the dark. We are actually looking at the absolute ultimate masters of a frozen planet who weaponized animal fat and invented life-saving clothing technology. They were the stubborn, fiercely rebellious survivors who flatly refused to go extinct when the entire global climate turned violently against them. By enduring suffocating caves, burning greasy bones, and huddling tightly together, they successfully kept the fragile, flickering flame of humanity alive. Their immense physical suffering and incredibly deep psychological bonds directly purchased the luxurious, temperature-controlled modern comfort that you casually enjoy right now. The Ice Age was undeniably a horrific, frozen nightmare, but it was also the exact crucible that permanently forged modern human society. Without that absolute terrifying cold, we might never have discovered the profound, necessary, and life-saving warmth of human empathy and tribal connection. So tonight, when the winter wind howls outside your modern window, and you suddenly shiver because the AC drops a single degree, you can just pull up your thick, heavy blanket and rest easy. You will never have to do the unthinkable to survive. Your small, digital fire will never fade into pale embers in the dark, because for over 100,000 long years, your tough ancestors already used those extreme, insane methods to fiercely fight the brutal cold on your behalf, so you do not have to. They fought the ultimate prehistoric winter with absolutely everything they had. And against all biological odds, they finally won.